and welcome to today's webinar, Functional Skills Support English Amplifications. For those of you that don't already know me, I'm Antonia Sherratt-McGrane, Principal Examiner at Highfield Qualifications. This one-hour webinar is designed to support centre staff with the administrative tasks presented to them following changes to the reformed Functional Skills Qualifications. Before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to the top right-hand side of your screen, where you should be able to see a small dialog box. From here, you'll be able to type your questions. I'll aim to answer all questions at the end of the webinar. If we have any specifically pertaining to level 1, as the webinar is split into level 1 and level 2, then obviously I'll try to answer those following level 1 input. With me in the room today is Amy and Becky, who will assist with answering questions or any technical difficulties. You'll also see there's a facility to raise your hand. Please use this if you experience any technical issues during the webinar, such as if you're unable to hear me or see the presentation slides. After we've finished today, I will close the webinar, and once this is done, you will be presented with a short survey. You will need to wait a few seconds before the survey pops up. However, please do complete this for us, as feedback is a really important tool for Highfield to ensure that we are meeting your needs and expectations. Your attendance today provides you with a formal certificate worth 1 CPD point, and this will be emailed as a PDF to the email address that you were registered with. The PDF certificate will be with you within 10 working days. Please note that we do not provide hard copies of these CPD certificates in line with our own sustainability policies. So let's get started. Okay, so if we start today looking at reading level 1. Subject content, point 9, identify and understand the main points, ideas and details in texts. While structuring the presentation today, we've looked at the subject content amplifications that are available in the centre handbooks. This is to give you considered input relative to teaching strategy and what your learners should be able to know and apply to allow effective assessment participation. So relative to identifying and understanding main points, we would still be expecting them to use appropriate reading methods to trace and understand the main points, ideas and details in both texts. So within that, we would again be looking to teach learners skimming and scanning methods, to understand that some texts only require main points, whereas in others, every detail requires careful reading. The question type itself will relate to a specific area or a term used within the actual text. Learners will also need to demonstrate the ability to provide a suitable level of detail relating to the content of the text. In those cases, they must pay explicit attention to the question stem. So, for example, where the question is asking them to consider views, features, etc., the answer must link directly to that and not the text in general. Subject content 10 is a new skill, compare information, ideas and opinions in different texts. You will see within the question types that we use, learners are only asked to compare. A comparison is a similarity or difference across texts. They need to be able to demonstrate the ability to compare those similarities and differences, and ideally use conjunctions and connectives when doing so. This will allow them to demonstrate they're able to more readily meet the assessment criteria. Subject content 11 asks learners to identify meanings in text and distinguish between fact and opinion. Learners need to be able to demonstrate their understanding that meaning can be explicitly stated, or it can be hidden and links into the inferent subject content, which we'll come to later on. They need to be able to identify what is meant in both cases, and they also need to be able to identify the difference between a fact and opinion in a given text. Subject content 12 asks learners to recognise that language and other textual features can be varied to suit different audiences and purposes. So a key point to note here is that the purpose at level 1 has changed. There is no longer an inform purpose, and the only purpose that will be tested will be that of instruct, describe, explain, and persuade. Language features themselves relate to the tone, whether it's formal or informal. The word choice, again, built on the 4 different types of purpose, so instructional, persuasive, explanatory, and descriptive, and also sentence structure. At level 1, we are encouraging them to at least try to use complex sentencing. Textual features relate to how a text is actually displayed and include emboldened text, italics, images, icons, symbols, font, and so on, as you can see here on the PowerPoint slide. We do really encourage, when we come to the writing element later on, that they do try and implement as many of these as they possibly can. Subject content 13, again, is a new skill. We're asking learners to use reference materials and appropriate strategies for a range of purposes, including to find the meaning of words. So you may well see within our text types, glossaries, legends, etc. We need to ensure that learners are able to use appropriate strategies to find the meanings of these words or phrases, such as within dictionaries and glossaries. They need to have an awareness that a word or term may have an alternative meaning within a text, and they need to be able to recognise and understand the meaning of homophones. If we look at subject content 14, we're now looking at organisational and structural features. Within the legacy qualifications, these linked to presentational features. So you will see here we've tried to be quite explicit in terms of guidance, organisational and structural, now linked to things such as contents lists, titles, headings, and so on, dependent on text type. Learners need to be fully aware of this and fully conversant for that, so that when they're asked questions such as what organisational features can be found within text A, they are aware that these types of items are actual organisational features. Subject content 15, infer from images meanings not explicit in the accompanying text. This is a new skill set, and learners need to be aware that images can be used to convey additional information to that found within the text. They then need to be able to make credible reference regarding those images and make sure that it's relevant to the actual text and the question stem. Subject content 16 asks that learners recognise vocabulary typically associated with specific types of purpose of text. So again, formal, informal, instructional, descriptive, explanatory, and persuasive. We've given some examples here on the text. So for example, where we're using formal language, we're using full English words, cannot, I am, you are, and so on. Informal, they are permitted to use contractions. Where they're using persuasive language for a particular purpose, we're looking for them to use words that convince readers to believe in an idea or to do an action. Instructional would be using imperative verbs, and explanatory would be a level of detail, facts, etc. Subject content 17, read and understand a range of specialist words in context. Learners need to be aware that specialist words are those that have a specific meaning within a certain context. So for example, it would be words that related to a specific job, a particular environment, a pastime, hobby, and so on, dependent on the scenario used within the actual text type. Within this instance, we really do encourage learners to use a broad range of vocabulary, and so that will transpire and transpose to the writing element. However, for reading, we would be encouraging them to use dictionaries and to really increase their vocabulary range. Subject content 18, use knowledge of punctuation to aid understanding and straightforward text. At level 1, awareness of or expected punctuation that we would expect to see at level 1 would be an accurate use of full stops, question marks, exclamation marks, commas, and possessive apostrophes. They need to understand why a writer may use different types of punctuation. So, for example, an exclamation mark to emphasize a point. That we also want them to be able to read a sentence correctly using the punctuation to assist understanding. So awareness of comma placement or possessive apostrophes to identify belonging. Again, we would be encouraging as a teaching strategy within the writing element that they do use a range of punctuation, and we'll come to that later. So if we look now at writing level 1, when we're looking at the expectations that we'd expect to see within the punctuation remit, again, we'd be encouraging readers to read back through whatever whatever work they've produced at the time to meet the task descriptors, encouraging them to use a range of punctuation that they are specifically expected to use at this level. So again, full stops, question marks, exclamation marks. We want the correct use of capitalization. So for example, at the start of a session, an uppercase for an I, at the start of the sentence, uppercase for an I, names and proper nouns, and so on. It's important that they do not write in block capitals because they will not score any marks as they've not been able to demonstrate appropriate punctuation range. We would encourage learners as well to be imaginative so that they can include these kind of punctuation range. So for example, could they include a question mark within an article or within a letter? The only time it would be difficult to do that would be within a report text type, as generally that's matter of fact, it's factual, and you don't generally give an opinion or use rhetorical questions. Subject content 20, we're asking learners to use correct grammar, so subject-verb agreement, consistent use of different tenses, definite and indefinite articles, and we are expecting them to use these accurately and consistently. Subject content 21, spell words used most often in work, study and daily life. So spelling common words correctly. These are those that occur frequently in work, study and life. Spelling specialist words correctly, those that have a specific meaning within a certain context. And that spelling rules are applied correctly, that those relative to letter sound correspondence are applied correctly, as are common words with prefixes and suffixes. So this is where by consistent and regular use of dictionaries will really help to serve the writing element. Subject content 22, communicate information, ideas and opinions clearly, coherently and accurately. We're aiming for learners to be able to structure writing using an introduction, body and conclusion, where they provide their own information, ideas and opinions in a logical order. We aim for the content to be communicated clearly and accurately, ensuring that the learner is able to fully comprehend the text. At level 1, there are 2 tasks the learners are asked to create. For each of those tasks, they are given task descriptors in the form of bullet points of what they should include. Again, we'd be looking to see that all of those bullet points are actually covered within the given assessment material. This laps over into subject content 23, where we're asking them to write an appropriate level of detail. At level 1, for task 1, they are given a word count, and that word count is approximately 150 to 200 words. The word count is open in task 2. So where we're asking them to produce text that meets the purpose of the task and audience, that is again linked directly to the task descriptor and the bullet points that are given as guidance. By doing that, they will ensure that they'll have an appropriate level of detail, and then it's down to them to use their imagination in terms of the information that they include within the text to support the central idea. Subject content 24, where we ask them to use format, structure and language appropriate for audience and purpose. Again, they need to be familiar with the range of text types that may come up at assessment. So in this instance, we're looking at a letter, an email, leaflet, advert, article and report, and structure these to suit the intended audience and purpose. So again, looking at the language needed and for what purpose. This links into the legacy qualification, which we used to refer to as presentational features, whereas now we're looking to include the associated organisational and structural features that we featured in one of the previous PowerPoint slides. To give you some guidance, you can see on this next slide that the expectations for the different types of text are as given here. So for a letter, no change. We're looking to see a sender's address, a recipient's address, date, salutation and close. If they're given an email to produce, they will be given a template, but it must be completed correctly with functional email addresses in terms of who it is to and who it's from, subject, date, salutation and close. And then in terms of the leaflet, advert, article or report, we would be looking for a title and a heading plus 2 or more additional features as appropriate, and some examples are given here. Subject content 25 asks that learners write consistently and accurately in complex sentences, using paragraphs where appropriate. Learners need to understand the difference between simple and complex sentences. They need to be able to use accurate complex sentences in writing, effectively using conjunctions and connectives. We're also expecting learners to use well-structured paragraphs that aid clarity to the text. It's really important that learners are aware of how to structure the paragraphs. Many occasions we'll see assessment material coming through where a learner has what appears to be has used paragraphs, but actually when you dissect the information down, it's one sentence or it's very large writing over 2 or 3 lines. So it is really important that they're taught to use a clear beginning, middle, end, and use paragraphs to facilitate that. Okay, any questions so far for level 1 reading and writing? Okay, one of the questions was, will you be sending out a copy of the slides from today? Yes, these will be emailed out along with your CPD certificate within 10 working days. The written information is available in the subject content amplifications, which is in the centre handbook. Okay, no further questions at the moment on level 1, but obviously we'll keep them coming through. Oh, sorry, hang on one moment. Okay, so within task 2, there's no suggested word count, but yeah, 150 to 200 word is an expectation. However, they won't lose marks on this. It just needs to make sure that there is an appropriate level of detail and that it is fit for purpose and audience. Okay, so I'll move on to level 2. Feel free to keep the questions coming through and I'll address them at the end. Okay, very similar to level 1 in terms of identifying the different situations where the main points are sufficient and those where it is important to have specific details. The question types will determine which of these skill sets they need to be able to apply. So it's important as a teaching strategy that learners are taught to use appropriate reading methods to identify main points. So again, we're looking at skimming and scamming. But then they are able to extract the appropriate level of information required to answer the given question. It's really important that they only use the text to extract the information. Where learners have a historic experience maybe of the scenario that's been used within the text, so for example, health and safety, the danger is they apply their own experience to the answer. The answer must relate to the actual text. Subject content 12 asks learners to compare information, ideas, and opinions in different texts, including how these are conveyed. So, building on the level 1 skill set in terms of being able to compare information, ideas, and opinions, in particular noting similarities and differences, they also need to be able to discuss how they are conveyed. So, for example, have they used specific language features? Have they used textual devices such as statistics to support their opinion? Have they used a range of organisational features? So where there is a two-step element to this particular skill set, it's important that they know the difference. So they would start with a comparison, but then they would need to discuss how they are actually conveyed. Identifying implicit and inferred meaning in texts. Learners need to be aware that meaning in text can be inferred as well as implicit. So with level 1, it tends to come from the image, whereas within level 2, the inference is within the written text. Learners need to be able to make plausible reference to that particular inferred meaning, again relative to the content of the text. Learners need to understand that inference can be the result of omission from the text, as well as what's included. And then they need to be able to extract that implicit information relative to the question or task requirements. Again, I must reiterate, the answers must link to the text and not their own supposed knowledge. Subject content 14 at level 2, understand the relationship between textual features and devices and how they can be used to shape meaning for different audiences and purposes. So we've tried to give explicit guidance here relative to textual features and relative to textual devices. And it's really important that learners are aware of this terminology because it may well come up in a question and they need to be able to apply it should they need to in a writing context as well. So textual features, for example, relate to how the text is displayed and include emboldened text, italics, images, icons, symbols, varying fonts, and so on. The textual devices relate to how a text is written and could include rhetorical questions, alliteration, anecdotes, statistics, quotations, and so on. Subject content 15, use a range of reference materials and appropriate resources for different purposes, including to find the meanings of words in straightforward and complex sources. So again, learners need to demonstrate the ability to use a variety of reference materials such as glossaries, keys and legends, dictionaries and thesauruses. You may see these kind of extracts coming up in the text types in order to allow the learner ability to demonstrate that competency. They should also be familiar with paper-based and online versions of these reference materials. Subject content 16 refers to organisational features and how they can be used to locate relevant information in a range of straightforward and complex sources, excuse me. Learners need to be aware that organisational features are visual aspects that structure the text. And again, we've given you some guidance here relative to what those organisational features may actually be, such as your contents lists, bulleted lists, numbered lists, and so on. Subject content 17 asks that learners are able to analyse text, recognising their use of vocabulary and identifying levels of complexity, formality, and bias. Learners need to understand that the choice of vocabulary informs the level of complexity and formality. It may be that they use, it's an informal context, so they're able to use contractions, or one of the text types may be an advert, and in that instance, persuasive text is used. They need to understand that bias is the tendency to unfairly prefer one person or thing to another. Learners need to show understanding that a writer or someone featured in a text can influence a reader by showing their support or opposition to a person or a thing. And they need to be able to identify which text is the most biased when reading two or more texts. Within that, you may also wish to consider which is the least biased as well. Subject content 18, follow an argument identifying different points of view and distinguishing fact from opinion. So again, building on level 1 skill set, where learners are asked to determine between fact and opinion. This is allowing learners to demonstrate awareness of an argument and the different viewpoints within that. And again, the question types that you may discover here. So for example, compare the viewpoints of, again, it's really important that they specifically use the question stem and discuss the viewpoints as opposed to the text in general. There needs to be an awareness that arguments are presented through independent viewpoints, and these may actually build on bias, fact, and/or opinion, and that those may actually apply across different texts. Subject content 19 is a new skill in terms of identifying different styles of writing and the writer's voice. Again, we've tried to give you some examples here so that this can inform a teaching strategy. So the style of writing is demonstrated through the use of linguistic features such as formal or informal, specialist or non-specialist, straightforward or complex. The writer's voice is expressed through the writer's use of language and word choice. So, for example, imagery, persuasive, enthusiastic, biased. Writing level 2. Subject content 20, punctuation. You will see here we're building on level 1 expectations, but the range of punctuation we would expect to see at level 2 should include the correct use of colons, commas, inverted commas, apostrophes and quotation marks. They need to demonstrate a wide range of punctuation, including appropriate and correct capitalization of work. Block capitals throughout the text are not permitted, and an amalgamation of upper and lower case, again, would be penalised. Correct punctuation is expected throughout at level 2. Subject content 21, using correct grammar. We see here, building again on level 1, subject-verb agreement, consistent use and range of tenses. What we're expecting them to use is the correct use of modality devices to express probability or desirability. So I would, I should, I would like, those kind of things really. Subject content 22, spell words used in work, study and daily life. We're looking for learners to correctly spell words that occur frequently, correctly spell words of a specialist nature, so again relative to a particular context or particular job, study, activity or hobby, and again using their knowledge of level 1 root words, prefixes and suffixes. Wherever possible, we should be encouraging the learners to use a broad range of vocabulary to demonstrate this particular skill set and competency within. Subject content 23, communicates information, ideas and opinions clearly, coherently and effectively. Again, learners are able to structure writing using an introduction, body and conclusion, providing information, ideas and opinions as appropriate in a logical order, ensuring that content is communicated clearly and accurately so that the reader is fully able to comprehend the text. Within the writing level 2 exam, they are not given bullet points to aid the task descriptor. So it's really important that learners are actively encouraged to be imaginative with the content that they can put in there, but in order to include as much detail as possible to sufficiently meet the actual task. At level 2, there is a word count for task 1, which is 250 to 300 words. Again, task 2 remains open. What we're looking for is that the learner produces text that meets the purpose of the task and the audience, ensuring that task requirements are met within the piece of writing, ensuring that the length of the text is neither too long or too short. Task 2 is open, but again, we'd be looking for the level of detail to be conducive with the actual task requirement. Ensuring that there is sufficient text against which each of the subject content can be assessed. We don't actually mark planning, but it is a useful tool that learners are encouraged to use a planning strategy. There is a planning option within each of the actual assessment papers where they can plan out what they want to write to ensure that the level of detail and appropriate length is an option for them. Subject content 25, organise writing for different purposes using appropriate format and structure, for example, standard templates, paragraphs, bullet points and tables. We've given here a range of the types of text that you may expect to see and how these can be structured to suit the intended audience. So at level 2, we're still looking at a letter, an email, leaflet, advert, article or report. And within that, we would be looking for them to explain, instruct, persuade and describe, ensuring that each type of text is formatted and structured correctly, again to meet the purpose and needs of the audience. To reiterate, we've given here the expected content or organisational features for each of the different text types. You'll notice here that paragraphing is awarded under a different subject content. So paragraphs are not awarded under subject content 25 for level 2. Subject content 26 asks learners to convey clear meaning and establish cohesion using organisational markers effectively. So organisational markers that we may expect to see within a text type include a contents page, chapters headings and other subheadings. It may be bulleted lists, numbered lists, captions to photos and illustrations, text box, tables. So there's a distinct difference between organisational features and organisational markers. Again, where possible, we should be encouraging learners to use an amalgamation of both to ensure maximum opportunity for attainment. Where organisational markers, it's difficult to implement them within the task type, learners will not be penalised for not including these if it's appropriate to omit them. Subject content 27, use different language and register, suited to audience and purpose. We're looking for learners to use appropriate language and register that meets the purpose of the task and the audience. And this can include the tone, the formality of the language, the persuasive techniques, supporting evidence, specialist words, etc. Subject content 28, construct complex sentences consistently and accurately using paragraphs where appropriate. So learners need to understand the difference between simple and complex sentences and use accurate complex sentences in writing. Conjunctions and connectives should be used effectively, and paragraphs should be well structured to aid clarity to the text. Any questions for level 2? If you want to type your question into the dialog box, then it will flash up on my screen. We will be making practice tests available.
Yes, there will be further practice tests available within the coming months.
We don't have any teaching resources available at present. We have the subject content amplification is really quite detailed. So feel free to have a look at those, and then I'll also check in terms of are we intending to create any additional resources for centres. Okay, well, I'll stay online for a few moments longer just in case you've got any further questions. Hopefully you found that useful. As I said earlier, the webinar will be available and we'll send out your certificate within the next 10 working days. Alternatively, please feel free to contact us should you have any further questions or need any additional help. The writing tasks, one of the questions that's come through, yes, the writing tasks are more detailed. The timings won't change. It will still be the 60 minutes.
We've got a question here about Skills Forward. Yes, we will still be supplying access to Skills Forward for the reformed functional skills. If you speak to your account manager, they will be able to provide you with more information on that.
How many questions will be in the reading exams? Our writer guidance stipulates between 12 to 15. The format for level 1 is pretty much the same. There are multiple choice questions followed by open response questions per text type. Reading level 2 is still all open response. Pass marks are dependent on paper, so each paper has a different pass mark. Regarding exam reports on fails, whether that would indicate the area for development, you can request a learner feedback report, which would identify the areas for development. Otherwise, results are pass or fail. Well, thanks very much for your attendance this morning. Any other questions you may have, please feel free to email them through. Alternatively, thank you very much and we'll speak to you soon.